The summer of 1965 was brutal in Los Angeles. The heat wave had been going for 3 weeks, and the soundstage at Paramount Pictures felt like the inside of an oven. The air conditioning had broken down 2 days earlier, and the studio executives had decided it was cheaper to keep shooting than to fix it. The film was called The Silencers, the first of what would become a successful spy comedy series starring Dean Martin as secret agent Matt Helm. The production was running behind schedule, over budget, and everyone was miserable. But nobody was more miserable than the director, Phil Karlson. Karlson was a veteran of Hollywood. He had been directing films since the 1940s. He was known for 2 things: getting films done on time and on budget, and being absolutely brutal to anyone who got in his way. He screamed at cameramen. He berated sound technicians. He reduced makeup artists to tears. The crew hated him, but they needed their jobs, so they kept their mouths shut. Dean Martin had worked with difficult directors before. He had learned to tune them out, to focus on his performance, to collect his paycheck and go home. He wasn't the type to get involved in other people's problems. That wasn't his style. Dean Martin minded his own business. But on August 14, 1965, everything changed. The scene they were shooting that day was a party sequence. The script called for Matt Helm to enter a room full of beautiful women and exchange witty banter with several of them. It was a simple scene. Walk in, smile, deliver a few lines, move on. Among the actresses hired for the scene was a young woman named Sarah Mitchell. She was 19 years old, fresh out of drama school, and this was her first real film role. She had exactly 3 lines of dialogue, but to her it was the beginning of everything. She had dreamed of being an actress since she was a little girl in Kansas, and now here she was, on a real Hollywood soundstage, in a real Hollywood movie, with real Hollywood stars. Sarah was nervous. Her hands were shaking as she waited for her cue. She had rehearsed her 3 lines 100 times the night before. She knew them perfectly. But when the camera started rolling and Dean Martin walked toward her with that famous smile, her mind went blank. "Cut!" Karlson's voice echoed through the soundstage like a gunshot. Sarah's heart sank. She knew she had messed up. Karlson stormed onto the set, his face red with anger. "What the hell was that? You had 3 lines. 3 simple lines. Can you count to 3? "I'm sorry, Mr. Karlson. You just what? You just forgot how to act? You just forgot why you're here?" The crew watched in uncomfortable silence. This was Karlson being Karlson. Nothing new. Nothing anyone could do about it. "Let's go again," Karlson said, returning to his chair. "And this time, try to remember that you're supposed to be a professional." They reset the scene. Dean Martin gave Sarah a reassuring wink as he walked back to his starting position. She tried to smile, but her eyes were wet with tears she was fighting to hold back. "Action!" Dean walked in. Sarah opened her mouth to deliver her first line. Nothing came out. "Cut! Cut! Cut!" Karlson was out of his chair before the word finished echoing. He marched toward Sarah, and this time, he didn't stop at yelling. "Are you stupid? Is that the problem? Did your mother drop you on your head when you were a baby?" Sarah was crying now. Silent tears streaming down her cheeks, ruining her makeup. "I paid for a professional actress, and they sent me a retarded farm girl who can't remember 3 goddamn words." The crew shifted uncomfortably. A few people looked away. Nobody said anything. "Maybe you should go back to Kansas and milk cows because you clearly don't have what it takes to be in pictures. You're wasting my time. You're wasting the studio's money, and you're embarrassing yourself." Sarah was sobbing now, her shoulders shaking, her carefully applied makeup running down her face. Karlson wasn't done. He stepped closer, towering over her, his voice dropping to a cruel whisper that somehow carried across the entire soundstage. "You know what you are? You're nothing. You're a pretty face with an empty head. The only reason you're here is because someone thought you'd look good in a tight dress. Well, guess what? There are 1,000 girls in this city who look good in tight dresses, and most of them can actually remember their lines." He turned to his assistant director. "Get her out of here. Find me someone who can actually do the job." Sarah Mitchell stood frozen in the middle of the set, her dream crumbling around her, her dignity in pieces on the floor. And that's when Dean Martin moved. He had been watching from the edge of the set, leaning against a fake wall, smoking a cigarette. He had seen Karlson's tantrums before. He had ignored them, like everyone else. It wasn't his business. He was just the talent. But something about this moment was different. Maybe it was the look on Sarah's face, the look of someone whose spirit was being broken in real time. Maybe it was the way Karlson had called her stupid, retarded, nothing. Maybe Dean remembered his own early days when directors had screamed at him, told him he would never make it, tried to break him down. Or maybe Dean Martin just couldn't stand by and watch a 19-year-old girl be destroyed for forgetting 3 lines on her first day in pictures. Whatever the reason, Dean Martin put out his cigarette, straightened his jacket, and walked slowly toward Phil Karlson. The crew noticed. They stopped what they were doing. Something was happening. Something that didn't happen on film sets. Something that could change everything. Dean walked right up to Karlson, who was still berating his assistant about finding a replacement actress. Karlson didn't notice Dean approaching until he was standing directly in front of him. "Karlson." The director turned, irritated at being interrupted. "What is it, Dean? We're in the middle of—" Dean Martin's fist connected with Phil Karlson's jaw. It wasn't a wild swing. It wasn't a dramatic movie punch. It was a single, precise blow. The kind of punch a man learns growing up in the rough neighborhoods of Steubenville, Ohio. The kind of punch that ends conversations. Karlson went down. Hard. He hit the floor of the soundstage and stayed there, staring up at the ceiling, too stunned to speak. The soundstage was absolutely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. 50 people stood frozen, unable to process what they had just witnessed. Dean Martin, the king of cool, the man who never lost his composure, the star who was famous for not caring about anything, had just punched the director of his own film. Dean looked down at Karlson, his voice calm and cold. "You don't talk to people like that. Not on my set. Not ever." Karlson struggled to sit up, holding his jaw. "You're finished, Martin. You hear me? I'll have you fired. I'll have you blacklisted. Go ahead." Dean's voice was ice. "Call the studio. Call the press. Tell them Dean Martin punched you because you made a 19-year-old girl cry on her first day in pictures. See how that plays in the papers." Karlson's face went pale. He hadn't thought about that. He hadn't thought about how this would look. Dean turned to Sarah Mitchell, who was still standing in the middle of the set, tears streaming down her face, unable to comprehend what was happening. "Come with me, sweetheart." He put his arm around her shoulders and gently led her away from the set, away from Karlson, away from the dozens of eyes that were watching. He took her to his dressing room, sat her down on the couch, and handed her a glass of water. "Drink this. Take a breath. You're okay." Sarah's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the glass. "Mr. Martin, I'm so sorry. I ruined everything. I couldn't remember my lines, and now you've hit the director because of me and—" "Stop." Dean's voice was firm but kind. "You didn't ruin anything. That man is a bully. He's been terrorizing people on this set for weeks. Someone should have stopped him a long time ago. But your career, he said he'll have you fired." Dean laughed. Actually laughed. "Sweetheart, I've been fired before. I've been blacklisted before. I've had studio heads tell me I'd never work again. You know what happened? I kept working. Because here's a secret about Hollywood. The bullies make a lot of noise, but they don't have as much power as they think they do." He sat down across from her. "Now let me tell you something. What happened out there, forgetting your lines, that happens to everyone. It happened to me on my first film. It happened to Frank Sinatra. It happened to Marilyn Monroe. The nerves, the pressure, the lights. It's overwhelming. Anyone who says they've never frozen on camera is a liar." Sarah wiped her eyes. "Really? Really. The difference between the people who make it and the people who don't isn't talent. It's not about never failing. It's about getting back up after you fail. It's about walking back onto that set tomorrow and trying again. I don't know if I can go back out there. After what happened. Dean leaned forward. Listen to me carefully. What Phil Karlson said to you, that you're nothing, that you're stupid, that you don't belong here. That's not true. He said those things because he's a small, angry man who makes himself feel big by tearing other people down. That's his problem, not yours. He paused. You have a choice right now. You can let his words define you. Let this moment break you. Go back to Kansas and spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been. Or you can decide that his opinion doesn't matter, that the only opinion that matters is your own, that you're going to walk back onto that set, deliver your 3 lines and prove, to yourself, not to him, that you belong here. Sarah looked at Dean Martin, this man she had idolized from a distance, who had just risked his career to defend her dignity. Why did you do it? She asked. Why did you hit him? You could have just ignored it like everyone else. Dean was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer. Because I remember what it's like to be nobody. I remember what it's like to have people tell you you're worthless, you're nothing, you'll never amount to anything. And I remember the people who stood up for me when no one else would. Without them, I wouldn't be here. He looked at Sarah. Someone once told me that the measure of a person isn't how they treat people who can help them. It's how they treat people who can't do anything for them. You're a 19-year-old actress with 3 lines. You can't do anything for my career. But that doesn't mean you deserve to be treated like dirt. Sarah was crying again, but these were different tears. Grateful tears. What happens now? She asked. Now? You fix your makeup. You go back out there. You deliver your 3 lines. And when this picture wraps, you go audition for another one, and another one. And you keep going until someone gives you a chance to show what you can really do. And what about Mr. Karlson? Dean smiled that famous smile. Let me worry about Phil Karlson. Back on the soundstage, chaos was unfolding. The assistant director was on the phone with the studio executives, trying to explain what had happened. Karlson was sitting in his chair, holding ice to his jaw, threatening to sue everyone involved. The crew was gathered in small groups, whispering, wondering if the production was about to shut down. Then Dean Martin walked back onto the set. The whispers stopped. Everyone turned to look at him. Dean walked to the center of the soundstage and addressed the room. I know you all saw what happened. I'm not going to apologize for it. Phil Karlson has been treating people on this set like garbage for weeks. Someone had to say something. I chose to say it with my fist. He looked around at the crew, the grips, the cameramen, the makeup artists, the lighting technicians, the people who worked long hours for little pay, who were never thanked, who were always blamed when something went wrong. I don't know what's going to happen next. Maybe the studio fires me. Maybe they sue me. Maybe this is the last picture I ever make. But I'll tell you this. I'd rather lose my career than stand by while someone destroys a young girl's spirit for forgetting a few words. The soundstage was silent. Then someone started clapping. It was a grip, a big guy who had been in the business for 20 years. He was standing by the lighting rig, clapping slowly, deliberately. Someone else joined in. Then another person. Then another. Within seconds, the entire crew was applauding. 50 people, clapping for Dean Martin, showing their support in the only way they could. Karlson watched from his chair, his face a mask of fury and humiliation. He had been directing films for 20 years, and no one had ever stood up to him. No one had ever dared. The applause continued for a full minute. It was the sound of decades of frustration being released. Every time Karlson had screamed at someone, every time he had humiliated a crew member, every time people had swallowed their anger and said nothing, it all came out in that applause. When the clapping finally died down, the assistant director approached Dean. Mr. Martin, I just got off the phone with the studio. They want to speak with you. Dean nodded. I figured they would. But sir, off the record, thank you. Someone needed to do that. Dean walked off the set, heading toward the production office where the studio executives were waiting. He didn't know what would happen. He didn't know if his career was over, but he knew he had done the right thing. The meeting with the executives lasted 3 hours. They threatened to sue him. They threatened to fire him. They reminded him that he was under contract, that he had obligations, that punching directors was not acceptable behavior. Dean listened to all of it. Then he said, "Gentlemen, you can fire me if you want. But before you do, think about this. Tomorrow, the story of what happened on that set is going to leak. It always does. And when it does, people are going to ask, why did Dean Martin punch a director? And the answer is going to be, because that director was screaming at a 19-year-old girl, calling her stupid and worthless, making her cry in front of the entire crew." He paused. "Now you can make me the villain in that story. You can fire me and tell everyone I'm a violent, out-of-control star. But who do you think the public is going to side with? The millionaire studio executives who protected the bully? Or the actor who stood up for a scared kid on her first day in pictures?" The executives looked at each other. Dean Martin was right. The optics were terrible. In the court of public opinion, Karlson would be the villain, and Dean would be the hero. The next morning, Phil Karlson was removed from the production. The official story was creative differences. The real story spread through Hollywood like wildfire. Dean Martin had punched a director for bullying an actress, and the entire crew had applauded. Sarah Mitchell returned to the set the next day. She was terrified, but she came back. She delivered her 3 lines, perfectly, and when the director yelled, "Cut!" the crew gave her a small, warm round of applause. It wasn't a standing ovation. It was just a few people clapping, a few smiles, a few nods of encouragement. But to Sarah Mitchell, it meant everything. The Silencers wrapped production a month later. It became a hit, spawning 3 sequels. Dean Martin became even more famous, his reputation as a gentleman solidified by whispered stories about what he had done for that young actress. And Sarah Mitchell? She didn't become a star. Her career was modest, supporting roles in television shows, small parts in films, the occasional commercial. She never won any awards. She never became a household name. But she kept working. For 30 years, she kept working. Every audition, every rejection, every small victory. She remembered what Dean Martin had told her in his dressing room. The difference between the people who make it and the people who don't isn't talent. It's about getting back up after you fail. Sarah Mitchell and Dean Martin never became close friends. They existed in different orbits of the Hollywood universe. But every year, on August 14th, the anniversary of that day on the set, Sarah would send Dean a card. Just a simple note. "Thank you for standing up, Sarah." Dean never responded in writing, but his assistant told Sarah that every year when the card arrived, Dean would read it, smile, and put it in his desk drawer. He kept every single one. In 1995, Dean Martin died on Christmas Day. Sarah Mitchell was 49 years old when she heard the news. She was between jobs, struggling to pay rent, wondering if her career was finally over. She had thought about quitting 1,000 times over the years. But every time she thought about giving up, she remembered that day in 1965. She remembered Dean Martin's words. And she kept going. She flew to Los Angeles for the funeral. She didn't know if she would be allowed in. She wasn't family, wasn't a close friend, wasn't a star. But when she arrived at the church, one of Dean's daughters recognized her name. "You're Sarah Mitchell, the one from the Silencers?" Sarah nodded, surprised. "Dad talked about you. He said you were the bravest person he ever met." "Me? Brave?" "He said you came back to set the next day, even though you were terrified. He said that took more courage than anything he ever did." Sarah was escorted to the front row. She sat there surrounded by movie stars and studio executives, feeling like she didn't belong. But she stayed. For Dean. When the service was over, Sarah was approached by an older man she didn't recognize. "Miss Mitchell, I'm Tom Garrison. I was a grip on the Silencers. I was there that day, in 1965. Sarah shook his hand. "I remember you. You were the first one to applaud." Tom smiled. I've been wanting to thank you for 50 years. Thank me? For what? For giving Dean Martin a reason to do what he did. I'd been in the business for 15 years by then. I'd seen 100 directors treat people like garbage. I'd never said anything. I was too scared of losing my job. But when Dean punched Karlson, when we all started clapping, something changed. I realized that staying silent made me part of the problem. Tom's eyes were wet. After that day, I promised myself I would never watch someone get bullied without speaking up. It cost me a few jobs over the years, but it also earned me respect. People knew I would stand up for them. He squeezed Sarah's hand. So thank you, Miss Mitchell. Thank you for being the person Dean Martin couldn't ignore. Thank you for giving all of us a chance to find our courage. Sarah Mitchell left the funeral with a new understanding of what had happened that day in 1965. She had always thought Dean Martin saved her. Now she realized the truth. They had saved each other. Dean needed a reason to act on his principles. Sarah gave him that reason, and in doing so, they both gave 50 people on that soundstage permission to stand up for what was right. That's how courage works. It's contagious. One person stands up and suddenly others find the strength to stand up too. Dean Martin threw one punch in 1965, but the impact of that punch echoed for decades, in every person on that set who learned to speak up, in every young actress who heard the story and felt less alone, in every bully who thought twice before tearing someone down. Sarah Mitchell died in 2018 at the age of 72. She never became famous. Her obituary was small, barely a paragraph. But among her possessions, her family found a collection of items that told a different story. 30 cards, one for every year from 1965 to 1995, all addressed to Dean Martin, all saying the same thing: thank you for standing up. And one photograph, faded and worn, showing a 19-year-old girl in a sparkly dress standing next to Dean Martin on the set of The Silencers. On the back, in Dean's handwriting, to Sarah, you belong here. Don't let anyone tell you different. Dean Martin, 1965. That photograph was worth more to Sarah Mitchell than any award, any role, any amount of money. It was proof that someone had believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. It was proof that kindness matters. It was proof that one moment of courage can echo forever.